30 seconds expired with no response from the human governments. Admiral Kethvar expected this. Most primitive species needed time to process the reality of their situation. He gestured to his weapons officer with one of his 4 arms. Begin the demonstration. Target their largest population center with a precision strike. Something visible, but not immediately fatal. They need to understand what they're dealing with. The weapons officer's tentacles danced across his control interface. Plasma cannon charging, Admiral. Target acquired. Settlement designation, New York. Shall I target their primitive communication arrays first? No, Kethvar replied, his compound eyes reflecting the tactical displays. Hit something symbolic. Their intelligence suggests they value tall structures as status displays. Remove one completely. The psychological impact should trigger immediate surrender protocols. The plasma beam lanced down from the dreadnought with surgical precision, striking what the targeting computer identified as Empire State Building. The ancient skyscraper vanished in a pillar of superheated energy, leaving only a perfectly circular crater where it had stood moments before. Kethvar watched the tactical feeds, waiting for the inevitable flood of surrender requests that had marked every previous conquest. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The radio chatter that erupted from the planet below wasn't panic or pleas for mercy, it was coordination. Strike confirmed, downtown Manhattan. All units, this is not a drill. Execute Broken Arrow protocols immediately. Roger that. All civilian populations are to proceed to designated shelter areas. Military commands Alpha through Zulu are now active. Pentagon to all commands. Unknown hostiles have demonstrated weapons of mass destruction capabilities. Rules of engagement are now unrestricted. Repeat. Rules of engagement are unrestricted. Kethvar's mandibles spreading confusion. Broken Arrow? What tactical significance does a damaged projectile weapon have? He turned to his intelligence officer. Lieutenant, what do our databases indicate about human military terminology? The younger Zephyrian's secondary arms worked frantically at his console. Admiral, our penetration of their information networks was limited to civilian channels and basic military communications. This Broken Arrow designation doesn't appear in any of our intelligence briefings. Before Kethvar could respond, his sensor operator's voice cut across the command deck with an edge of alarm. Admiral, I'm detecting massive energy signatures emerging from the planet's surface. Multiple launch sites are going active simultaneously. The main display shifted to show Earth's surface, and Kethvar felt his auxiliary hearts begin to race. Across every continent, missile silos were opening like flowers blooming in fast forward. But these weren't the primitive chemical rockets his intelligence had documented. The energy signatures were completely unknown, far beyond anything in the galactic database's records of pre-spaceflight civilizations. Sir, the sensor operator continued, his voice now openly worried. I'm reading over 3,000 individual launch signatures. Energy output is... Admiral, these readings don't make sense. Some of these projectiles are showing power levels comparable to our own plasma torpedoes. The first wave of missiles broke atmosphere 12 minutes later. Kethvar watched in growing amazement as his point defense systems, designed to handle anything a primitive species could possibly throw at them, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed. The human missiles weren't following predictable ballistic trajectories. They were maneuvering, adapting, splitting into multiple warheads that seemed to communicate with each other. Evasive action, he commanded, but even as the words left his breathing passages, he knew it was too late. The first missile to penetrate their defenses struck the dreadnought's port shield array with an impact that sent shockwaves through the entire kilometer-long vessel. Damage report, Kethvar barked, gripping his command throne as the ship shuddered around him. Port shields at 60%, came the reply from his engineering officer. Sir, that impact signature, it wasn't chemical or nuclear. It was some kind of antimatter warhead. The humans have antimatter weapons. That was impossible. The galactic database was comprehensive, compiled over millions of years of contact with thousands of species. No civilization developed antimatter weaponry before achieving faster-than-light travel. It was physically, technologically impossible according to every known law of technological progression. Another impact rocked the ship, and then another. The human missiles were arriving in waves now, each one adapted to counter the defensive measures used against the previous wave. Kethvar's tactical display showed something that defied belief. His mighty dreadnought, veteran of 43 successful conquests, was losing a direct engagement with a species that hadn't even developed interstellar flight. Admiral, his communications officer called out over the noise of another impact. We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's from the same source as the initial warning. Put it through, Kethvar ordered, his voice tight with stress. The same calm human voice filled the command deck. Unknown vessel, you have committed an act of war against Earth and its people. You have exactly one opportunity to withdraw from our solar system. You have 10 minutes to begin moving away from Earth orbit, or we will consider you a legitimate military target and respond accordingly. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. His ship was under heavy fire, his shields were failing, and the humans were still making demands? Open a response channel, he ordered. This is Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet, he transmitted. You primitive creatures cannot possibly comprehend what you're dealing with. I command a force capable of reducing your entire planet to molten slag. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. The response came back immediately, and for the first time, Kethvar detected something other than cold professionalism in the human voice. There was something else there, something that made his combat-hardened nervous system suddenly flood with adrenaline. Admiral, this is General Patricia Hayes, United Earth Defense Command. I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. You seem to think you're the first hostile aliens we've ever encountered. The transmission paused, and in that silence, Kethvar became aware of something his tactical computers had been trying to tell him for the past several minutes. His long-range sensors were detecting objects moving in Earth's outer solar system. Massive objects that shouldn't exist. Ships. Hundreds of ships approaching from the darkness between planets. General Hayes' voice returned. And now Kethvar could identify what he'd heard in her tone. It wasn't anger or fear. It was amusement. The thing is, Admiral, we've been dealing with your kind for about 20 years now. The hegemony made the same mistake you're making. So did the Korthax Empire and the Stellar Confederation. They all saw a young species with primitive technology and thought we'd be easy prey. Another wave of missiles struck Kethvar's ship, and this time the impacts came with perfect precision. His weapon systems went offline in sequence, each one targeted by munitions that seemed to know exactly where to hit. The engineering officer's report confirmed his worst fears. Admiral, they're using our own electromagnetic signatures against us. These missiles are adapting to our ship's configuration in real time.
The problem with your intelligence gathering, General Hayes continued conversationally, is that you only looked at our public technology.
What you didn't see was what we learned from the first 3 species that tried to invade us. Antimatter containment from the hegemony, adaptive targeting systems from the Korthax, quantum entanglement communications from the Stellar Confederation. Turns out humans are really good at reverse engineering. Kethvar's compound eyes fixed on his sensor display as the full scope of his mistake became clear. Those ships approaching from the outer system weren't showing up on conventional sensors because they weren't using conventional propulsion. They were using technology that belonged to advanced spacefaring civilizations. Technology that should have been completely beyond Earth's capabilities. You see, Admiral, General Hayes' voice continued, every species that's tried to conquer Earth has had the same flaw. You all assume that being more advanced makes you superior. But there's one thing about humans that none of you ever factor into your invasion plans. The first of the human fleet ships entered weapons range, and Kethvar's sensors showed him something that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his life, assuming he survived the next few minutes. The approaching vessels weren't cobbled together salvage or crude copies of alien technology. They were sleek, deadly, and built with a level of engineering sophistication that spoke of decades of preparation. What you never understood, General Hayes concluded, is that humans don't just learn from our enemies. We improve on them. Welcome to Earth, Admiral. I'm afraid your visit is going to be a short one. As the first human warship opened fire with weapons that burned brighter than stars, Admiral Kethvar realized that the Zephyrian Empire had just made the same fatal error as 43 previous conquerors. They had mistaken humanity's caution for weakness, their restraint for inability, and their desire for peace for a lack of preparation for war. The last thing Kethvar saw before his ship's main power core failed was a text message appearing on his communication screen, sent on an open channel from Earth's surface. It was brief, written in simple galactic standard, and somehow more terrifying than any threat or boast could have been. Thanks for the new technology. We'll put it to good use. The dreadnought Conquest of Worlds, veteran of 43 successful planetary invasions, went dark in Earth orbit 13 minutes after beginning what was supposed to be a simple demonstration of superior firepower. It would be the first of many Zephyrian vessels to learn that when it came to warfare, humanity had long since graduated from the primitive species the galaxy thought they were dealing with. But Admiral Kethvar, floating in an escape pod while human ships methodically captured or destroyed what remained of his fleet, couldn't have known that the real demonstration was yet to come. Earth hadn't just been preparing to defend itself for 20 years. They had been preparing to make sure this never happened again. Admiral Kethvar's escape pod tumbled slowly through space, its emergency systems providing just enough life support to keep him conscious as he watched the systematic destruction of the Zephyrian 5th Battle Group. Through the small porthole, he could see human ships moving with a coordination that spoke of years of practice. They weren't the desperate defenders he had expected. They were a military force that had clearly been preparing for exactly this scenario. The pod's communication system crackled to life, and a new human voice addressed him directly. Escape Pod 77 Alpha, this is Captain Rodriguez, aboard the UES Retribution. You are ordered to prepare for retrieval. Do not attempt to activate any weapon systems or self-destruct protocols. We have disabled your pod's offensive capabilities. Kethvar tried to access his pod's systems, only to discover that the humans were telling the truth. Every weapon, every emergency beacon that might alert the Zephyrian Empire to his location, every protocol that might deny the enemy intelligence, all of it had been quietly shut down by some kind of electronic warfare system he couldn't even detect. How? He whispered to himself, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. The Zephyrian Empire's military technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth should possess. Their escape pods were specifically designed to resist electronic warfare attacks from peer-level civilizations. The answer came as a docking tube connected to his pod with a soft clang. As the airlock cycled open, Admiral Kethvar found himself face-to-face with his first human being in person. Captain Rodriguez was smaller than he had expected, wearing a form-fitting uniform that seemed to incorporate technology the Admiral couldn't identify. Behind her stood two soldiers carrying weapons that definitely hadn't come from Earth's original technological base. Admiral Kethvar, Captain Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the same unsettling calm he'd heard from General Hayes. Welcome aboard the Retribution. I think it's time you understood what you've gotten yourselves into. As they escorted him through the ship's corridors, Kethvar's trained military eye catalogued everything he saw. The human vessel was clearly built around a core of captured alien technology, but the integration was seamless. More than seamless, it was improved. Power conduits that should have been incompatible were merged using principles he didn't recognize. Weapon systems from 3 different alien civilizations had been combined into hybrid designs that somehow exceeded the capabilities of their original forms. You're wondering how we did it, Captain Rodriguez observed, noticing his examination of the ship's systems.
The secret isn't our technology, Admiral.
It's our approach to problem solving. They entered what appeared to be a briefing room, where a holographic display showed the current tactical situation. The Zephyrian fleet, what was left of it, was completely surrounded. Human ships had emerged from positions throughout the solar system, including several that had been hiding in the asteroid belt and behind the planet's moon. The hegemony made the same mistake you did, Captain Rodriguez continued, activating the display. They sent a single battle group, confident that their technological superiority would be enough. They destroyed Los Angeles before we could stop them. The display shifted to show historical footage of the first alien attack on Earth. Kethvar watched massive insectoid ships reducing an entire human city to rubble while primitive Earth forces tried desperately to respond with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. 7 million people died that day, Rodriguez said quietly. But the hegemony made one critical error. They assumed that destroying our military would break our will to fight. They didn't understand that humans have a very specific response to being attacked. The footage changed to show the aftermath of the attack. Instead of surrender or collapse, it showed something that made Kethvar's auxiliary heart skip beats. Every human government had immediately begun sharing technology, resources, and intelligence. Scientists who had been rivals began working together. Military forces that had been enemies coordinated their efforts. The entire species had essentially declared war on the concept of being conquered. It took us 6 months to figure out how their ships worked, Rodriguez continued. Another year to improve on their designs. The hegemony probably thought they had time for a proper invasion fleet. When they came back with 100 ships, we were waiting with 150. The display now showed the battle footage that Kethvar recognized from galactic intelligence reports, though those reports had apparently missed some crucial details. The human ships in the recording weren't just using captured hegemony technology. They had redesigned it, optimized it, and combined it with innovations the hegemony had never conceived of. The Korthax Empire learned about our victory over the hegemony, Rodriguez went on. They decided we were dangerous enough to warrant a proper invasion. 3 battle groups and a planetary bombardment force. They lasted 4 days. More footage showing human ships that now incorporated both hegemony gravitic drives and Korthak's adaptive armor systems. But again, the human engineers had done something more than simple copying. They had solved problems that the original designers apparently never thought to address. And then came the Stellar Confederation. Rodriguez said, her voice taking on a note that Kethvar was learning to identify as uniquely human satisfaction. They sent an entire sector fleet, 2,000 ships, Admiral. They were absolutely certain that nothing could stand against that kind of firepower. The final set of recordings showed a space battle unlike anything in Kethvar's experience. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, their attacks precisely timed to exploit every weakness in Confederation fleet tactics. More importantly, they were using quantum entanglement communication systems that allowed instantaneous coordination across impossible distances. Each species that attacked us taught us something new, Rodriguez explained. The hegemony taught us about gravity manipulation. The Korthaks showed us adaptive material science. The Confederation introduced us to quantum mechanics we'd never imagined. But here's the thing about humans, Admiral. We don't just learn from our teachers. She gestured to a section of the display showing human shipyards that definitely hadn't existed when the Zephyrian intelligence had been gathered. Massive construction facilities scattered throughout the solar system were producing ships at a rate that defied belief. We reverse engineer everything. We optimize it. We find the flaws that the original designers couldn't see because they were too close to their own work. And then we mass-produce improvements that are better than anything the galaxy has ever seen. Kethvar finally found his voice. This is impossible. The technological development curve doesn't work this way. No species advances this quickly without centuries of gradual progress. Captain Rodriguez smiled, and Kethvar realized he was seeing that particular human expression for the first time. It wasn't a friendly smile. That's because every other species develops technology in isolation, she replied. They build on their own discoveries, limited by their own perspective and their own cultural blind spots. But humans, Admiral, we've had the best teachers in the galaxy. 4 different civilizations have very generously provided us with complete technological databases. The implications of what she was saying hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Earth hadn't just been defending itself for 20 years, they had been systematically studying, improving upon, and integrating the technology of every species that attacked them. Each invasion had made them stronger. Your empire sent you here because your intelligence indicated that Earth was a primitive, divided world with limited military capabilities. Rodriguez continued. That intelligence was 20 years out of date the moment the hegemony made first contact. We've been very careful to maintain the illusion that we're still using our original technology base. But why? Kethvar asked. If you possess this level of technological capability, why haven't you expanded into galactic space? Why remain hidden on your single world? Rodriguez's smile faded, replaced by an expression that was somehow far more intimidating. Because, Admiral, we learned something else from studying your civilizations. We learned that the galaxy is full of species that viewed conquest as an acceptable form of foreign policy. We learned that there are empires built on the subjugation of younger civilizations. We learned that what happened to Earth happens to other worlds on a regular basis. She activated another section of the display showing galactic charts that detailed the territories of various spacefaring empires, including the Zephyrian holdings. So we've been waiting, she said quietly, building our strength, perfecting our technology, and preparing for the day when we would have the capability to make sure that what happened to Earth never happens to anyone else. Kethvar looked at the display showing his empire's territorial boundaries, and a cold realization crept over him. You're not just defending yourselves anymore. No, Rodriguez agreed. We're not. Your attack on Earth was the last straw, Admiral. The Galactic Council has spent thousands of years allowing the strong to prey on the weak. They maintain their comfortable balance of power by ensuring that younger civilizations never get the chance to threaten the established order. She gestured to the tactical display, which now showed something that made Kethvar's respiratory system seize up entirely. Human ships were moving throughout the solar system, but not defensively. They were forming up into fleet formations and setting courses that led away from Earth. The galaxy is about to learn what humans do when we've had enough, Rodriguez concluded. We don't just fight back against our attackers. We make sure they can never attack anyone else ever again. Through the briefing room's viewing port, Admiral Kethvar could see the largest human fleet in history preparing to depart Earth's solar system. Ships that incorporated the best technology from 4 different civilizations, designed by a species that had turned being invaded into an advanced course in military engineering. But what truly terrified him was the realization that this fleet wasn't heading toward the Zephyrian Empire to seek revenge. According to the navigational displays, they were heading for the galactic core, where the ancient civilizations that had spent millennia as unchallenged masters of the galaxy were about to receive a very unpleasant education in how humans dealt with bullies. The galaxy had made the mistake of teaching Earth how to fight. Now Earth was going to teach the galaxy what happened when you picked on someone who was smarter, more adaptable, and considerably more vindictive than you had counted on. Admiral Kethvar closed his compound eyes and tried not to think about what the next few months were going to mean for every empire that had ever considered conquest an acceptable diplomatic tool. The galaxy had created a monster, and that monster was about to remind everyone why humans had a saying about sleeping dogs. 3 weeks after the failed Zephyrian invasion, Admiral Kethvar found himself in an observation deck aboard the UES Determination, flagship of the first human expeditionary fleet. Through the reinforced viewing ports, he could see something that challenged everything he thought he knew about interstellar warfare. 1,500 human ships moving in perfect formation through hyperspace toward the galactic core. His human escorts had been surprisingly accommodating. Instead of the prison cell he had expected, he'd been given quarters that were comfortable by any reasonable standard, access to the ship's educational systems, and most surprisingly, complete transparency about humanity's intentions. They wanted him to understand exactly what was about to happen. Captain Sarah Chen, his primary liaison, had explained their reasoning with characteristic human directness. "You're going to survive this war, Admiral. When it's over, you're going to go back to what's left of your empire and tell them exactly what they brought down on themselves. We want there to be no misunderstanding about why this happened." Now, as he watched the fleet prepare to drop out of hyperspace at their first target, Kethvar was beginning to understand the scope of humanity's plan. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't even conquest in any traditional sense. This was something far more comprehensive and infinitely more terrifying. "Fleet command to all ships," came the announcement over the ship's communication system. "We are approaching the hegemony border station Alpha 7. Remember, our objective is not destruction, it's demonstration. We want survivors to carry word of what happens to those who prey on the innocent." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect synchronization, and Kethvar got his first look at what had once been considered one of the most impregnable fortifications in the galaxy. Border Station Alpha 7 was a massive structure, larger than most moons, bristling with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. It commanded the primary hyperspace route between hegemony space and the galactic rim, and had never been successfully challenged in over 3,000 years of operation. The station's response was immediate. Thousands of defensive platforms powered up, while alarm signals began broadcasting on every emergency frequency. But what happened next was something that no defender in galactic history had ever experienced. The human fleet didn't attack. Instead, they began broadcasting on every communication channel simultaneously, in every known galactic language. "Attention Border Station Alpha 7. This is Admiral Marcus Thompson of the United Earth Navy. You are hereby ordered to surrender your facility and evacuate all non-essential personnel. You have 30 minutes to comply before we demonstrate why attacking Earth was a mistake." Kethvar watched the tactical displays as the hegemony commanders tried to process what they were hearing. A species they had written off as extinct was making demands of one of their strongest fortifications. The response was predictable. "Unknown fleet, you are trespassing in hegemony space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. This station is protected by the full might of the hegemony defense force." Admiral Thompson's reply was immediate. "Border Station Alpha 7, you seem to be under the impression that you have options. Allow me to clarify your situation." What followed was a demonstration that redefined Kethvar's understanding of what space combat could look like. The human ships didn't simply outgun the station. They systematically dismantled its defenses using tactics that seemed impossible. Weapons fire curved around defensive shields as if the laws of physics were suggestions rather than absolutes. Human ships moved through patterns that should have been suicidal, emerging unscathed from concentrated fire that should have vaporized them. More unsettling was the precision of their attack. Every shot was calculated not to destroy, but to disable. Weapon systems went offline without their power cores exploding. Shield generators failed without taking their surrounding structures with them. It was surgical dismantlement on a scale that required technological capability far beyond what any galactic civilization possessed. "How are they doing this?" Kethvar whispered to Captain Chen, who had joined him at the observation deck. Remember that quantum entanglement communication system we got from the Stellar Confederation? She replied, not taking her eyes off the battle. Turns out you can do more than just talk with quantum entanglement. You can coordinate targeting systems, share sensor data instantaneously across impossible distances, and synchronize attacks with precision that makes individual ships function like neurons in a single brain. The border station's defensive platforms were falling silent, one by one, their crews trapped but alive in facilities that had been designed to be their protective shells. But Kethvar noticed something else on the tactical displays that made his auxiliary hearts race. There, he pointed with one of his forearms. Those signatures on the long-range sensors, those are hegemony reinforcement fleets. Captain Chen nodded approvingly. Very good, Admiral. Yes, 3 full battle groups are approaching from the galactic interior. The Hegemony High Command obviously decided that this border station was worth defending. But that's over 900 ships, Kethvar protested. Even with your technological advantages, you can't possibly... Admiral, Chen interrupted gently, you're still thinking like every other species in the galaxy. You're thinking about this as a military problem that needs to be solved with superior firepower. But humans approach warfare differently. She gestured to the tactical display, where the approaching hegemony fleets were now clearly visible. Instead of moving to intercept them, the human fleet was pulling back from the border station. The goal here isn't to win a space battle, Chen explained. The goal is to teach the galaxy a lesson it will never forget. And the most important part of any lesson is making sure your students can't ignore what you're trying to teach them. As the hegemony reinforcement fleets approached, something unprecedented happened. The human ships didn't retreat or prepare defensive positions. Instead, they began broadcasting again, but this time their message wasn't directed at the border station. Attention approaching hegemony forces. This is Admiral Thompson. We are prepared to offer you the same choice we gave Border Station Alpha 7. Surrender your ships and evacuate all non-essential personnel, and you will be allowed to leave with your lives. Continue your approach, and we will be forced to demonstrate why that would be inadvisable. The lead hegemony admiral's response crackled across all channels. Human fleet, you are outnumbered 6 to 1. Your destruction is inevitable. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Admiral Thompson's reply would be recorded in every galactic history archive for the next 1,000 years. Hegemony forces, you have that exactly backwards. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a masterclass in technological supremacy, delivered with ruthless efficiency. The human fleet divided into 3 groups and engaged the incoming hegemony forces simultaneously. But instead of trying to match them ship for ship, they did something that Kethvar's military training told him was impossible. They began disabling multiple enemy vessels simultaneously, using weapons that seemed to ignore the basic principles of space combat. Energy beams that split into dozens of targeting streams. Projectiles that changed course mid-flight to strike multiple targets. Defensive systems that didn't just stop incoming fire but somehow turned it back on its sources. Admiral, Captain Chen said quietly, I think it's time you understood the most important lesson humans learned from being invaded. Each species that attacked us was technologically superior to us individually, but they all made the same fundamental error. On the tactical display, hegemony ships were going dark in precise sequence. Not destroyed, but disabled so thoroughly that their crews were trapped in metal shells floating helplessly in space. They assumed that because their technology was more advanced than ours, it was somehow perfect, Chen continued. They never considered that their designs might have flaws that an outside perspective could identify and exploit. The truth hit Kethvar like a physical blow. You didn't just reverse engineer their technology, you found the weaknesses. Every system has vulnerabilities, Chen confirmed. The hegemony's quantum shields have a resonance frequency that can be exploited if you have the right harmonic generators. Korthak's adaptive armor has a reset cycle that leaves it vulnerable for exactly 0.3 seconds every minute. Stellar Confederation ships have a power distribution system that can be overloaded if you know the right targeting algorithms. As she spoke, the last of the hegemony ships went silent. 900 vessels, representing one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, had been neutralized in less than an hour without a single human casualty. But the most important thing we learned, Chen continued, is that every aggressive civilization in the galaxy has the same basic weakness. They rely on intimidation and technological superiority to maintain control. They've never had to face an enemy that was both smarter and more ruthless than they are. Admiral Thompson's voice filled the ship again. All hegemony personnel, this is your final demonstration of what happens when you prey on species unable to defend themselves. Your ships are disabled but intact. Your crews are alive but trapped. In approximately 6 hours, our jamming systems will shut down and you will be able to send distress calls. When your rescue ships arrive, they will find you alive and unharmed, along with a complete recording of this engagement. There was a pause, and when Thompson's voice returned, it carried a note of absolute certainty that made Kethvar's nervous system flood with stress hormones. Make sure they understand that this was the gentle demonstration. Make sure they understand that Earth has built a fleet specifically designed to neutralize every military technology in the galaxy. And make sure they understand that the next species to attack a defenseless world will not receive the courtesy of disabled ships and live crews. As the human fleet prepared to jump to their next target, Captain Chen turned to face Kethvar directly. Your empire is next, Admiral. Not for revenge, but because the galaxy needs to see that the age of conquest is over. Every aggressive civilization will receive the same lesson we just gave the hegemony, and every one of them will be left to explain to their people how their invincible fleets were neutralized by a species they considered primitive. Kethvar looked out at the field of disabled hegemony ships floating helplessly in space and realized that he was witnessing the end of an era. For thousands of years, the galaxy had operated on the principle that might made right, that advanced civilizations could take what they wanted from those too weak to resist. But humanity had just demonstrated that there was something in the galaxy more dangerous than superior technology or overwhelming firepower. There was intelligence, adaptability, and the kind of cold anger that came from being pushed too far by people who should have known better. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans said never again, they meant it in ways that previous civilizations had never imagined possible. 6 months after the systematic neutralization of the hegemony border defense network, Admiral Kethvar found himself standing in the observation lounge of the UES Vindication as the human fleet approached the most heavily defended system in Zephyrian space. Below them, the twin worlds of Zephyr Prime and Zephyr Secondary represented the heart of an empire that had conquered 47 worlds over the past millennium. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had once commanded fleets that had brought these same worlds under Zephyrian control, using the same tactics of overwhelming technological superiority that the humans had so thoroughly dismantled. Now he was about to witness those worlds face an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Admiral," Captain Chen said, joining him at the viewing port, "I thought you should know that we've been monitoring communications from your home system for the past 3 weeks. Your high command is aware we're coming." Kethvar's mandibles clicked nervously. "What kind of response are they planning?" "Everything they have," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "Every ship, every defense platform, every weapon system your empire has ever built. According to our intelligence, they're calling it the final defense of Zephyrian civilization." Through the viewing port, Kethvar could see the scope of that defense beginning to reveal itself as the human fleet approached the system's edge. Massive space fortifications that had taken centuries to construct formed concentric shells around both inhabited worlds. Battle fleets representing the combined might of the entire Zephyrian Empire had been recalled from their garrison duties throughout conquered space. "Over 4,000 ships," Kethvar whispered, recognizing the fleet configurations. "Everything from light scouts to the Imperial dreadnoughts. And those defense platforms, they're using quantum tunneling weapons that can strike targets through dimensional barriers." "We know," Chen said calmly. "We've been studying Zephyrian military technology for quite some time now. Your empire was very generous in providing us with complete technical specifications when you attacked Earth." Kethvar's compound eyes focused on her in confusion. "That's impossible. Our ships were destroyed. Our databases were encrypted with quantum-level security protocols." Captain Chen's expression shifted to what Kethvar had learned to recognize as humanity's version of predatory satisfaction. "Admiral, you're still thinking about this in terms of the conventional warfare your species understands. Humans don't just reverse engineer captured technology. We reverse engineer the minds that created it." She gestured to a display that materialized in the air between them, showing detailed schematics of Zephyrian ship designs, weapon systems, and tactical doctrines. But these weren't just technical drawings. They were annotated with improvements, weaknesses identified, and countermeasures developed. "Every species thinks differently about engineering problems," Chen explained. "The way you design your ships tells us how you think about space combat. The way you arrange your defense systems tells us how you prioritize threats. The way you organize your fleets tells us how your command structure makes decisions under pressure." The display shifted to show psychological profiles of Zephyrian military leaders, tactical predictions based on historical battle patterns, and what appeared to be a complete breakdown of every strategic doctrine the Empire had ever employed. We don't just study your technology, Admiral. We study you. Your species, your culture, your military philosophy, your decision-making patterns. By the time we finished analyzing the data from your attack on Earth, we knew your Empire better than your own intelligence services do. As if summoned by their conversation, Admiral Thompson's voice filled the ship's communication system. All ships, prepare for Operation Clean Slate. Remember, our objective is complete neutralization of Zephyrian military capability with minimal loss of life. We want the galaxy to understand that resistance is futile, but genocide is not our goal. The human fleet began to deploy into attack formations, and Kethvar watched in growing amazement as they moved through patterns that seemed specifically designed to exploit every weakness in Zephyrian defensive doctrine. Instead of approaching as a unified force that could be targeted by the massed firepower of the defense platforms, they dispersed into smaller groups that attacked from angles the fortifications couldn't effectively cover. Your High Command is following the Kala defense doctrine, Chen observed, watching the Zephyrian ships moving into their traditional protective formations around the inhabited worlds, developed 3 centuries ago after your war with the Stellar Confederation. It's designed to create overlapping fields of fire that make it impossible for an attacking fleet to approach the primary targets. Kethvar nodded reluctantly. It's never been broken. Even when facing superior numbers, the Kalar doctrine has protected our core worlds from invasion. That's because every enemy you've ever faced has been limited by the same technological and tactical constraints that shaped your thinking, Chen replied. But humans approach warfare from a completely different paradigm. What followed redefined Kethvar's understanding of what space combat could become. The human ships didn't try to break through the Zephyrian defensive formations. Instead, they did something that the Kalar doctrine had never been designed to counter. They began dismantling the Empire's military capability from the inside out. Rather than targeting ships or fortifications, the humans struck at the infrastructure that made the Zephyrian fleet possible. Communication relays that coordinated defensive fire went offline in precise sequence. Power transmission systems that fed the massive defense platforms failed simultaneously. Supply depots that maintained the fleet's operational capability were neutralized without being destroyed. Their contents simply rendered inaccessible. This is impossible, Kethvar breathed, watching his empire's greatest military achievement being systematically taken apart. Those systems are hardened against every known form of electronic warfare. They have quantum-encrypted control systems that can't be accessed remotely. You're right, Chen agreed. They can't be accessed remotely using any technology your empire has ever encountered. But humans have had some very creative teachers over the past 20 years. On the tactical display, Kethvar could see the true scope of what was happening. The human fleet wasn't just using improved versions of captured alien technology. They were using capabilities that represented a synthesis of every advanced civilization they had ever encountered, combined with innovations that no single species had ever conceived. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, striking targets that thought they were protected by dimensional barriers. Weapons that used quantum entanglement not just for communication, but to deliver destructive force instantaneously across impossible distances. Electronic warfare systems that didn't just jam enemy communications, they rewrote them, turning the Zephyrian fleet's own coordination systems against themselves. The thing about fighting humans, Chen continued, as Zephyrian ships began going dark across the system, is that we don't just prepare for the war we expect to fight. We prepare for wars that our enemies can't even imagine. Admiral Thompson's voice cut through the ship again. Zephyrian High Command, this is Admiral Thompson. Your primary fleet has been neutralized. Your defense platforms have been rendered inoperative. Your communication systems are now under our control. You have 1 hour to evacuate all military personnel from your command centers before we demonstrate what happens to civilizations that refuse to abandon their aggressive policies. The response from Zephyr Prime came immediately. Transmitted on emergency frequencies. Human fleet, you may have superior technology, but you cannot occupy an entire empire. Even if you destroy our military, our people will resist until... Thompson's interruption was gentle but absolute. High Command, you misunderstand our intentions. We're not here to occupy your empire. We're here to ensure that your empire no longer has the capability to occupy anyone else's worlds. What followed was the most comprehensive demonstration of technological superiority in galactic history. Rather than destroying the Zephyrian infrastructure, the humans systematically altered it. Military production facilities found their manufacturing capabilities restricted to civilian goods. Shipyards discovered that their construction systems would no longer accept designs for military vessels. Research installations focused on weapons development had their databases modified to exclude anything that could be used for aggressive purposes. You're not conquering them, Kethvar realized with growing horror. You're reprogramming them. We're ensuring that they can never again pose a threat to peaceful civilizations, Chen corrected. Your empire will survive, Admiral. Your people will prosper. Your worlds will remain under your governance. But your ability to project military force beyond your own borders has been permanently eliminated. Through the viewing port, Kethvar could see Zephyrian ships floating helplessly in space, their crews alive but trapped in vessels that would never again serve military purposes. The defense platforms that had protected the Empire for centuries had been converted into monitoring stations that would ensure compliance with humanity's new galactic order. This is what happens to civilizations that prey on the weak, Thompson's voice announced to the entire system. Your choice is simple. Abandon your aggressive expansion and live peacefully among the galactic community. Or face complete technological regression until you learn to behave like civilized beings. As the human fleet prepared to move on to their next target, Captain Chen turned to face Kethvar one final time. Your empire was the fourth to learn this lesson, Admiral. The Stellar Confederation was the fifth. The Corfax Empire will be the sixth. By the time we're finished, every aggressive civilization in the galaxy will understand that the era of conquest through superior firepower is over. Kethvar looked out at the remains of everything his civilization had built through a millennium of conquest, now neutralized in a matter of hours by a species they had dismissed as primitive. What happens now? What happens to the galaxy when you've finished correcting everyone who disagrees with your vision of peace? Chen's smile was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply certain. Then, Admiral, the galaxy will finally be safe for civilizations to develop naturally, without fear that their progress will be cut short by empires that mistake technological advancement for moral superiority. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a Zephyrian empire that would never again threaten another world, Kethvar realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. Not conquest, not destruction, but transformation, the forcible evolution of an entire galaxy from a collection of predatory empires into something resembling an actual civilization. And the most terrifying part was that humanity was just getting started. 2 years after the systematic neutralization of the galaxy's major aggressive powers, Admiral Kethvar stood once again in an observation lounge, but this time aboard the UES Reconciliation as it approached the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. The irony of the ship's name was not lost on him. Humanity had spent the past 24 months forcibly reconciling the galaxy's predatory civilizations with reality. Through the viewing port, he could see something that would have been impossible to imagine before Earth's emergence as a galactic power. Representatives from over 300 species arriving at Nexus Prime, not for the traditional council sessions focused on maintaining the balance of power between empires, but for the first galactic convention on cooperative development. It's remarkable, isn't it? Captain Chen observed, joining him at his customary spot by the window. Over the past 2 years, their relationship had evolved from captor and prisoner to something approaching mutual respect, though Kethvar was never allowed to forget which of them represented the civilization that now effectively controlled galactic civilization. Remarkable isn't the word I would use, Kethvar replied, his mandibles clicking as he watched ships that had once belonged to proud military fleets, now serving as diplomatic transports. Unprecedented, terrifying, revolutionary. But remarkable suggests that this transformation was somehow natural rather than imposed by force. Chen nodded thoughtfully. You're not wrong. But consider the alternative, Admiral. Before humanity's intervention, how many civilizations were destroyed or subjugated by aggressive empires each year? How many species never got the chance to develop their potential because they were conquered before they could mature? The statistics were sobering, and Kethvar knew them by heart after 2 years of access to humanity's comprehensive analysis of galactic history. Over the past millennium alone, more than 800 civilizations had been eliminated or absorbed by expansionist empires. Countless others had never progressed beyond their home systems because they lived in constant fear of invasion. The Galactic Council's records show that 63 species achieved spaceflight last year alone, Chin continued. Compare that to the average of 12 per year over the previous century. When civilizations don't have to devote their entire industrial capacity to military defense, they develop remarkably quickly. As if summoned by their conversation, Admiral Thompson's voice filled the ship's communication system. All diplomatic vessels, This is Nexus Control. You are cleared for approach to diplomatic berths 7 through 43. Welcome to the first Galactic Convention, where every participant is here by choice rather than under threat of conquest. Kethvar's auxiliary heart skipped as he processed the implications of that statement. 43 berths. Before humanity's intervention, typical Galactic Council sessions involved perhaps a dozen major powers and their client states. Now, dozens of previously subjugated civilizations were participating as equals in galactic governance for the first time in their history. The Altarians are here, he noted, recognizing one of the approaching ships. I remember when the Korthax Empire absorbed their home system. That was 2 centuries ago? They regained their independence 8 months ago when we finished restructuring Korthax territorial holdings, Chen replied. Turns out that when you remove the military apparatus that was keeping conquered worlds suppressed, most of them are quite capable of governing themselves. The ship docked with the massive space station that served as the galaxy's diplomatic center, and Kethvar found himself part of humanity's diplomatic entourage as they made their way to the convention chambers. The transformation of Nexus Prime itself was evidence of how thoroughly humanity had altered the galactic order. What had once been a fortress designed to intimidate smaller civilizations into compliance was now a genuine center for cooperative governance. The main convention hall buzzed with activity as representatives from hundreds of species worked together on proposals that would have been unthinkable during the era of imperial dominance. Kethvar noticed that humanity's delegation was notably small, a dozen individuals led by Ambassador Sarah Martinez, who had been the primary architect of humanity's post-war diplomatic strategy. Welcome, beings of the galaxy, Ambassador Martinez said as the convention formally opened. Her voice carried the same calm confidence that had characterized every human interaction Kethvar had witnessed over the past 2 years. We gather here not as conquerors and conquered, not as masters and subjects, but as equal participants in shaping our shared future. The irony of the statement wasn't lost on anyone in the chamber. Humanity had achieved their dominant position through the most comprehensive military campaign in galactic history. But rather than using that dominance to establish a traditional empire, they had done something unprecedented. They had voluntarily dismantled the imperial system entirely. 2 years ago, Martinez continued, the galaxy operated on the principle that might made right, that technological advancement gave civilizations the right to subjugate their neighbors. Today, we establish a new principle, that every species has the right to develop according to its own nature, free from the threat of conquest. Ambassador Veltar of the former hegemony worlds rose to address the assembly. Kethvar recognized him as one of the few high-ranking officials to survive humanity's restructuring of his civilization. The hegemony wishes to formally acknowledge our crimes against peaceful civilizations and pledge our support for the new galactic order. We had forgotten that strength should be used to protect rather than to dominate. Similar statements followed from representatives of every former imperial power. The Korthax delegate apologized for centuries of aggressive expansion. The Stellar Confederation acknowledged the suffering they had caused through their territorial ambitions. Even Kethvar found himself speaking on behalf of the reformed Zephyrian Republic, formally renouncing his empire's history of conquest. But what truly impressed Kethvar was what came next. Rather than simply accepting these apologies and moving on, the convention began addressing the practical challenges of transforming a galaxy built on conquest into one based on cooperation. Resource allocation, announced Dr. Gasky. Patricia Vance, humanity's chief economic advisor, is no longer about whoever has the strongest fleet gets the best territories. We are implementing a system where resource-rich systems can trade their materials for technological development assistance from more advanced civilizations. Conflict resolution, added General Patricia Hayes, who had transitioned from military command to diplomatic service, will be handled through mediation and arbitration rather than military action. Any species that attempts to resolve disputes through force will find themselves dealing with the Galactic Defense Fleet. Kethvar had seen the Galactic Defense Fleet during its formation. Ships from dozens of reformed civilizations, all operating under human coordination and all equipped with technology that made resistance pointless. It wasn't an occupation force. It was a guarantee that the new order would be maintained whether anyone liked it or not. Scientific advancement, continued Dr. Vance, will be shared freely among all civilizations. The days when knowledge was hoarded to maintain military advantages are over. Every species will have access to the technological developments that will improve their quality of life. As the sessions continued over the following days, Kethvar began to understand the true scope of humanity's vision. They weren't just ending the age of imperial conquest, they were fundamentally restructuring how galactic civilization operated. Trade replaced tribute. Cooperation replaced competition. Scientific advancement became a shared endeavor rather than a military advantage. But perhaps most importantly, they were ensuring that no single civilization, including humanity itself, would ever again have the power to dominate the galaxy. The Galactic Defense Fleet operates under a rotating command structure. Captain Chen explained during one of their private conversations. Human technology provides the baseline capability, but command rotates among all member civilizations. No one species gets to be the permanent guardians of galactic peace. Even though humanity could maintain control indefinitely if they chose to? Kethvar asked. Chen smiled with what he had learned to recognize as genuine human satisfaction. Especially because we could maintain control indefinitely. The point isn't to rule the galaxy, Admiral. The point is to make sure that no one ever rules the galaxy again. On the final day of the convention, Ambassador Martinez addressed the Assembly one last time. The document we signed today establishes the Galactic Cooperative as a permanent replacement for the old imperial system. Every civilization commits to the principle that strength exists to protect the weak, that knowledge exists to benefit all, and that the future of the galaxy belongs to every species equally. As representatives from hundreds of civilizations signed the Galactic Cooperation Charter, Kethvar reflected on the transformation he had witnessed. Humanity had spent 20 years being invaded, studying their enemies, and preparing for this moment. They had systematically dismantled every aggressive civilization in the galaxy, not out of hatred or desire for revenge, but to create something that had never existed before. A truly peaceful galactic civilization. What happens now? He asked Captain Chen as they prepared to depart Nexus Prime. Now, Chen replied, looking out at the ships representing hundreds of civilizations departing to spread word of the new order throughout the galaxy. Now we find out what the galaxy can accomplish when its civilizations compete to create rather than to destroy, when they race to discover rather than to conquer, when they strive to uplift rather than to subjugate. As the UES Reconciliation jumped to hyperspace, carrying Kethvar back to his home among the Zephyrian worlds, he realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war not by defeating their enemies but by transforming them into allies. They had conquered the galaxy not by subjugating its civilizations, but by liberating them from the cycle of conquest that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. The galaxy had made the mistake of attacking Earth, not knowing humanity's true strength. But humanity's true strength hadn't been their technology or their military capabilities. It had been their refusal to accept that the strong must inevitably prey upon the weak, their determination to create a galaxy where every civilization could develop according to its own nature, and their wisdom to understand that true victory meant ensuring that no one, including themselves, would ever need to fight such a war again. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and it had all started because a species that called themselves human had refused to accept that being conquered was inevitable, and had instead decided to teach the galaxy a better way to exist among the stars.